The mansion of Mar-a-Lago had always been described as extravagant, golden, and larger than life, but few people knew the full history of the land it sat upon. Long before it became a symbol of wealth and power, the soil beneath it was considered cursed ground. Local folklore spoke of ancient rituals performed by indigenous tribes, ceremonies meant to seal away something dark that lingered in the earth. The ocean winds carried whispers about blood offerings and shadows that never faded, no matter how bright the sun. But time has a way of burying the truth. Walls were built, chandeliers hung, and golden trim covered the rotting bones of history. Mar-a-Lago became a palace for the powerful. Guests came, drank, laughed, and left. But the house remembered. Donald Trump never paid much attention to these whispers. He saw the mansion as his fortress, his stage, his crown jewel. Yet as the years went by, the nights inside Mar-a-Lago began to feel different. At first, it was subtle, creaks in the floorboards, faint drafts even when windows were shut, and the occasional mirror that seemed slightly warped. Small things, easy to dismiss, until one night. It was just past midnight. The staff had left, the guests were gone, and the entire mansion was silent. Trump walked through the main hall, the sound of his footsteps echoing against the marble floor. He had always liked to wander the halls at night, as if surveying his kingdom, but tonight felt wrong. The air was heavy, thick, like breathing through water. He paused beneath the massive chandelier. The crystals swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. Then he noticed it, his reflection in the polished surface of the marble floor. It stared back at him, but something was off. His reflection didn't move in sync. When he tilted his head, the reflection hesitated, lagging just a moment behind. He frowned, leaning closer to the glossy stone. And then, the reflection smiled. Trump stumbled back, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. He glanced up at the mirrors that lined the hall. Each one reflected him, but differently. Some showed him older, wrinkled, hunched. Others showed him pale and lifeless, with eyes rolled back into white voids. One mirror showed him standing in flames, screaming silently. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath. "Just tired." But the whispers began then, low at first, like the murmur of a distant crowd, then louder, clearer, until words could be made out. They weren't in English. They weren't in any language he recognized. The syllables scratched at the inside of his skull, forcing their way into his thoughts. He turned sharply, expecting to see someone behind him. The hall was empty, but the mirrors vibrated with the sound. The glass rippled, as if it were water. Suddenly, the chandelier above him shook violently, the crystals clattering together, like bones rattling in a coffin. Trump ducked back, his pulse racing. One by one, the candles inside the chandelier flickered and went dark until the entire hall was cast in shadow. Only the mirrors glowed faintly, their glass shimmering with pale light. And then he saw it. At the far end of the hallway, a figure stood, tall, shadowed. Its form shifted with every flicker of the light. Sometimes it looked like a man, sometimes it looked like a corpse, sometimes it looked like him. "Who's there?" Trump demanded, his voice echoing through the empty space. The figure didn't move, didn't answer. It only tilted its head, unnaturally slow, like a puppet on strings. Trump stepped backward. The sound of his footsteps echoed, but not in sync. Another set of footsteps followed, half a beat behind, as though his reflection had stepped out of the mirrors and was now walking in the real world. He quickened his pace. The footsteps quickened too. By the time he reached the door to the main ballroom, his chest was heaving. He threw it open, stumbling inside. But what he saw made his blood run cold. The ballroom was filled with mirrors, dozens of them, lining the walls from floor to ceiling. Yet none of them reflected him. Instead, they reflected empty space, or worse, distorted versions of him in states of decay, madness, and ruin. One reflection clawed at the glass, mouth open in a silent scream. Another was slumped in a chair, eyes gouged out. Another stood with a noose around his neck, swaying gently as if moved by some invisible wind. Trump's throat tightened. He wanted to run, but his legs refused to move. His eyes were drawn to the largest mirror at the center of the ballroom. Unlike the others, this one showed him exactly as he was, alive, breathing, terrified. He staggered toward it, desperate for some sense of normalcy. He raised his hand, pressing it against the cold glass. His reflection did the same. For a moment, relief washed over him, but then his reflection grinned, and with a sudden, violent motion, it slammed its hand against the other side of the glass. The mirror cracked, a jagged line splitting across his reflected face. The sound was deafening, like thunder trapped inside the walls. The other mirrors followed suit, cracking and shattering one by one. Shards of glass fell like rain, slicing the air. Trump fell to his knees, covering his head. The whispers rose into screams, echoing all around him, overlapping, deafening, and then silence. When he lifted his head, the ballroom was empty. The mirrors were whole again, gleaming as if nothing had happened. But he knew it wasn't over. Something had been awoken, something was watching, and it wasn't going to let him go. The next day, Trump refused to speak of what had happened in the ballroom. He told himself it was exhaustion, stress, maybe even a bad dream. But deep inside, he knew better. The images in those mirrors hadn't felt like dreams. They had felt real, too real. All day, he wandered through the mansion, as though nothing was wrong. Staff came and went, servants polished the gold trim, and tourists outside the gates snapped photos of the estate. Everything looked perfectly normal in the sunlight, but the sunlight never lasted. By dusk, an unease began to settle over the halls. It wasn't just in his head. Others noticed it too. A maid crossing the hall paused suddenly, frowning at a mirror on the wall. She tilted her head, staring at it as if something inside was staring back. Her lips moved, as though she were whispering to herself. When Trump called her name, she jumped and ran without explanation, dropping her cleaning cloth. By nightfall, the mansion had emptied again. Silence returned, and with it, the whispers. Trump sat alone in his study, the glow of a desk lamp illuminating papers scattered across the surface. He tried to read, to write, to do anything to distract himself, but the lamp began to flicker. Once, twice. Then it dimmed until the room was cloaked in shadow. A sound came from the corner. At first, a faint tapping, like fingernails against wood. Tap, tap, tap. He froze, staring into the dark. Slowly, the sound grew louder, sharper, until it became pounding. He reached for the lamp, shaking it. The bulb flickered, then blazed back to life, revealing the tall figure standing in the corner. Its face was blurred, constantly shifting as if it wore dozens of masks at once. Sometimes his own face, sometimes the face of a stranger, sometimes nothing but a black void. Trump stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Get out!" he barked, trying to sound commanding, but his voice cracked. Betraying his fear, the figure did not move. Instead, it tilted its head in that same unnatural way. Then it began to walk, slow, deliberate steps, each one echoing through the study. The closer it came, the colder the room grew, frost spreading across the glass of the nearby windows. Trump stumbled back, slamming into his desk. He reached for the phone, but the line was dead. Static hissed faintly in the receiver, a sound that almost formed words. The figure stopped only a few feet away. Its form shimmered, and for a moment, it looked exactly like him. The same suit, the same hair, the same expression. But when it opened its mouth, blood poured out, thick and black, spilling onto the floor. Trump gasped, tripping over his chair as he scrambled toward the door. He yanked it open, only to find himself standing not in the hallway, but in the ballroom again. The mirrors, the endless mirrors. They glowed faintly in the darkness, each one humming like a heartbeat. He spun around, trying to retreat, but the door was gone. The study had vanished. There was only the ballroom now, stretching endlessly in all directions. He turned toward the largest mirror, the one that had cracked the night before. But this time, it showed something different. Not him, not a reflection. It showed the study, his study, as it had been seconds ago. Papers scattered, the lamp glowing, the phone off the hook, an empty chair. He reached toward the glass, desperate. If this was some kind of portal, he could step back through. He could escape. But the reflection shifted. The chair in the study was no longer empty. Someone sat in it now. It was him, or at least a version of him. This one looked calm, almost smug, as though nothing were wrong. He leaned back in the chair, hands folded across his chest. He looked up at Trump through the mirror and smiled. Trump slammed his fist against the glass. "Let me out," he shouted. "This is my house." His reflection only laughed, but the sound didn't come from behind the glass. It came from all around him. The ballroom shook with the sound of his own laughter, layered, distorted, overlapping in a chorus of madness. The mirrors began to shatter, not all at once, but one by one, like dominoes falling. Each explosion of glass released a burst of icy wind that cut across his skin. From the shards that scattered across the floor, shapes began to crawl out. Hands, arms, bodies. Figures emerged, twisted versions of himself, their skin pale and stretched tight over bone. Some dragged themselves forward on broken limbs. Others walked upright, eyes hollow, mouths gaping in silent screams. They moved toward him, surrounding him, reaching out with skeletal fingers. Trump backed against the last, unbroken mirror. His breath came in short gasps, his chest tight. The figures pressed closer, their whispers filling his head, words he didn't understand, but that scraped against his thoughts like claws. And then the lights flared. The ballroom was suddenly bright, the chandeliers blazing, as if nothing had happened. The figures were gone. The mirrors were whole again. Trump collapsed to his knees, trembling. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. But this time, something was different, because in the mirror behind him, his reflection didn't move. It just stood there, smiling. The third night arrived with an air of inevitability. Trump told himself he would leave Mar-a-Lago, check into one of his hotels in New York, maybe even fly across the world. But when dusk fell, he found himself still inside the mansion, as if the walls themselves had refused to let him go. He had ordered the staff not to return that evening. The place was silent, every corner soaked in shadows. Still, he walked the halls like a man trying to convince himself of control. His shoes clicked against the marble floor, but the sound seemed muffled, swallowed by the air. The whispers began sooner. This time, by the time the moon rose, they were already loud, crawling through the corridors, seeping from the walls, rising up from the floor like steam. Trump pressed his hands over his ears, but the voices weren't just in the air anymore. They were inside his skull. He tried to escape through the front doors. The massive golden handles felt cold in his grip, frostbitten. He pulled, but the doors refused to open. They didn't even rattle. When he looked out through the glass, he didn't see the driveway or the palm trees. He saw nothing, just blackness, endless, hungry blackness. His throat tightened. He staggered back, heart pounding. The house had locked him in. He ran down the hall, turning corner after corner, searching for another exit, but something was wrong. Each hallway led to another hallway, which led to another, each one identical to the last. The gold trim, the marble floors, the chandeliers, everything repeated, over and over, until he felt like he was trapped in a loop. He stopped, gasping for breath. His reflection in a nearby mirror was gasping too, but when he bent over, hands on his knees, his reflection remained standing tall. It stared at him, unmoving, until slowly, deliberately, it raised its hand and dragged one finger across its throat. The glass cracked. Trump stumbled back, panic flooding his veins. He turned and ran again, faster this time, desperate to escape the endless corridors. But then he realized something horrifying. He had been running for what felt like hours, and yet the moon outside the windows hadn't moved. The clock on the wall still read 12:03. The night was frozen, time itself refusing to move forward. He was trapped in an eternal midnight. His footsteps echoed unnaturally, bouncing back at him seconds later, as though someone were chasing him with a half-beat delay. When he stopped, the footsteps continued, louder, closer. He spun around. At the end of the hallway, a figure stood. This one looked exactly like him. Same suit, same hair, same expression twisted with fear. But it wasn't a reflection. It was real. The other Trump stepped forward, each movement jerky, puppet-like. Its eyes were black pits, swallowing the light. Its mouth opened slowly, too wide, splitting the skin at the corners. A deep growl poured out, layered with hundreds of voices. Trump screamed and ran again, but the hallway shifted beneath his feet. The floor stretched, rippling like water. Doors melted into the walls. Chandeliers hung lower, their crystal arms bending downward, like skeletal hands, reaching for him. He turned a corner and found himself back in the ballroom. The mirrors, always the mirrors. This time, they were different. They no longer showed twisted versions of him. They showed moments, snapshots of his life, crowds cheering, cameras flashing, his hand raised, taking an oath, his face plastered across headlines. But as he watched, the images shifted. The cheering crowds turned into mobs with eyeless faces, their mouths gaping in silent screams. The oath-taking ceremony warped into a funeral, his body lying still in a coffin. The headlines dripped with blood, the words melting off the page. He staggered backward, shaking his head. No, no, this isn't real. The largest mirror at the center of the ballroom shimmered, and his reflection stepped out. Not twisted, not decayed. It was him, exactly him. Same suit, same fear, same sweat dripping down his forehead. For a moment, they stared at each other, breathing heavily, both trembling. Then the reflection smiled. "You don't belong here," it said, though its lips barely moved. The voice came from everywhere, vibrating through the glass, through the floor, through Trump's bones. I'm the real one, Trump shouted. The reflection laughed. The ballroom shook with the sound, glass rattling, chandeliers swaying violently. Then the reflection lunged. It tackled him, cold hands gripping his throat. The two struggled on the marble floor, grunting, choking, clawing at each other. But no matter how hard Trump fought, the reflection was stronger. Its grip was like iron, unyielding, impossible to break. He reached out, his hand brushing against broken shards of glass scattered on the floor. He grabbed one, slicing his palm, and stabbed upward. The shard cut across the reflection's face. It let out a scream, not his voice this time, but the shriek of something inhuman. 1,000 voices crying out in agony. It released him, staggering back. Black liquid poured from the wound, sizzling as it hit the floor. Trump scrambled to his feet, chest heaving, his throat burning. The reflection hissed, retreating into the mirror it had come from. The glass sealed shut behind it, leaving him alone once again. But he knew this wasn't over, because in every mirror surrounding him, dozens of other versions of himself pressed against the glass, waiting for their turn. The night stretched endlessly, a clock with no hands, a moon that never moved. Trump sat slumped against the ballroom wall, his body trembling, his throat raw from screaming. He had fought his reflection and survived. But he knew survival was only temporary. Something larger was at play, something ancient, patient, and hungry. The mirrors hummed faintly, vibrating like tuning forks struck by invisible hands. Their glow pulsed with an almost living rhythm, in sync with his own heartbeat. He tried to look away, to close his eyes, but the compulsion was too strong. The glass demanded his attention. One by one, the mirrors began to change. They no longer showed his reflection. They showed possibilities. The first mirror showed him seated at a desk in the Oval Office. The room looked familiar, yet wrong. The walls bled with cracks. The American flag sagged. Its stripes faded, its stars missing. On the desk lay a pile of bones, arranged like documents. His mirrored self signed them with a pen dipped in blood. Trump staggered to his feet, shaking his head. No, that's not real. That never happened. The next mirror drew his gaze. It showed him standing on a stage, a crowd stretching into the horizon. They chanted his name, but their voices were hollow, mechanical, as if the sound came from machines rather than throats. When the mirrored Trump raised his hand to wave, his skin peeled back, revealing rotting muscle beneath. The crowd cheered louder. Another mirror cracked violently, and in it, he saw himself in a prison cell, pacing endlessly, his face gaunt and pale. The mirror Trump stopped suddenly, staring directly at him, as though aware of his presence. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, that version of himself pulled the skin from his own face, revealing a skull grinning beneath. Trump screamed and staggered backward, colliding with another mirror. This one showed him lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors with blank, eyeless faces. Machines beeped steadily until a flat line cut through the air. The doctors stepped aside, revealing his corpse, and as he watched, the corpse sat up and turned to grin at him. He spun wildly, his breath ragged, the mirrors closing in on him like predators. Each one showed a different death, hanging from a rope, drowning in black water, buried alive beneath collapsing walls of gold, burned at the stake, while faceless crowds watched silently, torn apart by shadowy hands that reached from every direction. The images flickered, sped up, overlapping, until the entire ballroom became a kaleidoscope of horror. And then, silence. The mirrors froze on a single image, not a death, not decay. It showed Trump walking freely out the front doors of Mar-a-Lago. The gates swung open. The night lifted. The sun shone brightly over palm trees, swaying in the breeze. He looked happy, relieved, alive. Hope surged in his chest. He stepped toward the mirror, pressing his hand against the glass. The surface was warm, inviting, pulsing faintly, like living flesh. But then his reflection appeared within that same image. The version of himself, walking out into the sun, stopped, turned, and looked back at him. It shook its head slowly. Then the reflection whispered, "Not you." The glass shattered. A violent wind roared through the ballroom, whipping his hair, tearing at his clothes. The mirrors exploded one by one, shards slicing across his skin. He fell to the floor, arms shielding his face, as a scream rose around him. Not his scream, not even human. It was the scream of the house itself, the voice of Mar-a-Lago, echoing through every corridor and chamber. When the wind died, the ballroom was unrecognizable. The mirrors were gone. In their place were endless black doorways, stretching out into darkness. Each doorway pulsed faintly with light, as though leading somewhere else. Trump staggered to his feet, his body aching, his hands bleeding from cuts. He stared at the doorways, each one humming like a siren. Some glowed red, others green, others flickered between colors. Whispers poured from them, urging him forward, promising escape, power, salvation. He took one step toward the nearest doorway and froze. From the dark, something was stepping out. It was him, again. But this version was worse than any before. Its body was bloated, its skin gray and stretched, its eyes black holes that oozed thick liquid, its smile stretched impossibly wide, teeth jagged and broken. It crawled on all fours, its limbs cracking at unnatural angles. Behind it, in the other doorways, more figures began to emerge. Dozens, hundreds, all versions of him, twisted in different ways, some skeletal, some burned, some headless, some fused with gold, their bodies grotesquely decorated like statues. They crawled, stumbled, limped toward him, their whispers rising into a chorus. Trump backed away, but there was nowhere left to run. The ballroom stretched into infinity, doorways vomiting endless versions of himself, all hungry, all waiting. And as they drew closer, he realized the truth. The mirrors hadn't been showing him possibilities. They had been showing him inevitabilities. And there was no version of him that escaped. The ballroom pulsed with unnatural energy, every doorway birthing twisted versions of himself. Their whispers blended into a single chant, low and guttural, shaking the very floor beneath his feet. Trump pressed his back against the far wall, his hands trembling, blood dripping from shallow cuts across his arms and face. "No," he muttered, his voice breaking. "No, I'm not going down like this. This is my house. Mine." But the house didn't care. One doorway directly ahead of him began to glow brighter than the rest. Its light wasn't warm or inviting. It was sickly, like pus-colored fire. The air rippled around it, bending as if gravity itself were being torn apart. He tried to look away, but his body betrayed him. His feet dragged forward, his arms stiff at his sides, his will stripped away. The creatures, the endless versions of himself, parted to make way. They smiled grotesque smiles, clapping their broken hands together in mock applause as he staggered toward the doorway. He fought to resist, his heels dug against the marble floor, leaving streaks of blood from his wounded palms as he clawed at the walls for purchase. But the force was too strong. The doorway pulled at him like a whirlpool, dragging him closer, closer, until he was swallowed by its light. The world inverted. He fell, tumbling through endless black. His stomach lurched, as if gravity had ceased to exist. Screams surrounded him, his own screams, multiplied 1,000 times, all echoing, overlapping, never ending. And then he landed. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs. He gasped, rolling onto his side, the air thick with the stench of rot. Slowly, he pushed himself up, his hands sinking into mud. No, not mud. Flesh. The ground beneath him was made of pale, pulsating flesh, veins glowing faintly beneath its surface. It squirmed beneath his touch, as if alive. He stumbled backward, gagging, only to collide with something solid. He turned and saw a wall rising endlessly into the dark sky above. But this wall wasn't stone or brick, it was bone. Thousands of skulls fused together, their hollow eyes staring down at him, their mouths frozen mid-scream. The whispers returned, louder than ever, pouring from the skulls, vibrating through the flesh floor. They spoke in languages he didn't understand, yet somehow the meaning carved itself into his mind. You are ours. He tried to run. The fleshy ground squelched beneath his shoes, every step echoing like a heartbeat. But no matter how far he ran, the wall of skulls loomed beside him, stretching on forever. In the distance, a structure emerged, a twisted version of Mar-a-Lago, built from bone and sinew, its towers crooked, its windows filled with writhing shadows. The golden trim was gone, replaced with dripping black tar. The chandeliers hanging from its grotesque ceiling were made of rib cages and spines, swaying as though breathing. He stopped, his chest heaving, his throat dry. The mansion had followed him, or maybe it had always truly been here, in this place, waiting. The front doors opened with a groan that sounded like the wail of a dying animal. Darkness spilled out, swallowing the ground before him. And then something stepped through. It was him again, always him. But this version was colossal, towering over the twisted mansion itself. Its skin was stitched together with golden thread, its eyes glowing red like molten metal. Its voice boomed across the realm, shaking the very air. You built this place, it said, brick by brick, bone by bone. It belongs to you, and you belong to us. Trump shook his head violently. No, this isn't mine. This isn't real. The giant reflection bent down, lowering its massive head until its burning eyes were level with his. Its smile stretched wide enough to split its face in two. Reality, it whispered, is what the house decides. The ground beneath him split open. Fissures tore across the flesh, glowing with red light. From the cracks, hands clawed upward. Thousands of hands, skeletal, bloody, desperate. They grabbed his legs, his arms, his waist, pulling him down. He screamed, kicking, thrashing. But more hands emerged, gripping tighter, dragging him toward the chasm. He clawed at the fleshy ground, his nails tearing off as he tried to hold on. But the pull was irresistible. Inch by inch, he was dragged downward into the glowing abyss. Above him, the giant version of himself laughed, the sound shaking the world, the skulls, the very sky. As his head slipped beneath the surface, his last sight was the twisted mansion, its windows glowing with eyes. Hundreds, thousands, all watching, and then nothing but darkness. Darkness swallowed him whole. For a moment, he thought he was dead. No pain, no sound, no light, only a weightless void, pressing on his chest like an ocean without water. Then the whispers returned, not faint, not distant, but inside his skull. They slithered through his thoughts like worms, twisting memories, feeding on fear. He clutched his head and screamed, but the sound was devoured before it left his mouth. A faint glow emerged below. Slowly, his body drifted down toward it, like sinking in invisible water. The glow grew brighter until shapes began to take form. He found himself standing in a vast chamber. The walls were mirrors, towering panes that stretched endlessly upward, curving around him to form a perfect circle. The glass pulsed faintly, as though alive, veins of crimson light writhing beneath its surface. And in every mirror, he saw himself, but not just one reflection, thousands. Each pane showed a different version, some older, some younger, some sick, some broken, some twisted into monstrous shapes, with hollow eyes and jaws unhinged. Each one stared directly at him, their movements not matching his own. He staggered back, but no matter where he turned, his own eyes followed. A deep voice echoed, though no mouth spoke it. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. Do you see now? Trump spun in circles, desperate to locate the source. Who's there? Show yourself. The mirrors rippled. One reflection stepped forward, separating itself from the rest. It was him, but pale, gaunt, dressed in a black suit that dripped shadows like tar. Its smile was sharp, too sharp, stretching impossibly wide. I am you, the reflection said. Not the man the world sees, but the truth the house keeps. Trump shook his head violently. No, I don't believe this. This is a trick, some sick dream. The reflection chuckled, a hollow, rattling sound. You built this place to glorify yourself. You thought it was your fortress, your empire, but the land remembers, the walls remember. Mar-a-Lago is no palace. It is a mirror, a prison. Every soul who lays claim to it becomes part of its reflection, forever. Trump's breath quickened, panic clawing at his chest. No, I can leave. I'll sell it, burn it down if I have to. The shadow self stepped closer, its eyes glowing like embers. There is no leaving. The moment you claimed this place as yours, the moment you declared it eternal, it bound you. You are not its master. You are its captive. The mirrors trembled. Dozens of versions of him began pressing against the glass, their hands smearing the surface with blood, their mouths opening in silent screams. He stumbled backward, colliding with another mirror. The glass rippled like water, sucking at his skin. He tore himself free, leaving behind pieces of flesh that clung to the surface before melting into it. No, he rasped, falling to his knees. No, this isn't real. It can't be. The chamber shook violently, the sound of breaking glass echoing like thunder. Cracks spread across the mirrors, but instead of shattering, the cracks opened like wounds. Leaking darkness from those wounds, shapes emerged, grotesque figures stitched from pieces of his own reflection. Some had his face, but animal jaws. Others his hair but eyeless sockets, others bloated and decayed, dragging themselves forward with clawed hands. They circled him, moaning, whispering in unison, "Join us! Join us!" Trump scrambled to his feet, trying to run, but the chamber had no doors, no exit, only mirrors, only endless versions of himself closing in. The shadow self raised its hand. The creatures froze, then parted, leaving a clear path to one massive mirror at the far end of the chamber. Unlike the others, this one showed no reflection at all. It was pure, liquid black. "This is the truth," the shadow said. "Step through and see what you've always denied." The final face of Mar-a-Lago. Trump shook his head, backing away. "I won't. I'm not stepping into that. You can't make me." The shadow smiled wider. "You misunderstand. You already stepped through. You've been walking toward it since the first night. The house led you here. And now, there is no turning back." The floor lurched, throwing him forward. He stumbled, fell, and his hands plunged into the black surface of the mirror. It swallowed his arms, then his chest, dragging him inside despite his screams. Cold unlike anything he'd ever felt enveloped him. His lungs froze with every breath, his skin burning as though stripped from his bones. And then he saw it, Mar-a-Lago, but not the gilded estate of palm trees and chandeliers. Instead, a colossal structure of bone and shadow rising from a sea of writhing corpses. Its towers bent like twisted spines. Its windows glowed red with hungry eyes, and its gates were made of screaming mouths fused together. The land beneath it was not earth, but flesh, pulsating and alive, stretching on forever into an endless void. And above it all, perched on the highest balcony, was the shadow self, watching him, smiling. "This is the house you built," it said. "This is the legacy you cannot escape. You are not leaving, Donald. You are Mar-a-Lago, and Mar-a-Lago is you." The ground split beneath him. He plummeted into the sea of corpses, their hands clawing at his flesh, pulling him under. Their screams filled his ears, a chorus of agony that would never end. And as he sank, the last thing he saw was the house itself, leaning forward, its windows narrowing into 1,000 eyes, its gates stretching open like jaws, smiling, waiting, silence. When Trump opened his eyes, he was back in the ballroom. For one brief, fragile moment, he thought it had all been a dream, a hallucination, born of exhaustion. The chandeliers sparkled, the polished marble gleamed, and the golden trim reflected soft light across the walls. But something was wrong. The air was still, too still. No distant hum of electricity, no ocean breeze seeping through the cracks, no sound of life at all. The silence pressed in from every direction, suffocating in its weight. He stood slowly, his legs trembling. The wounds on his hands and arms were gone. His suit was clean, crisp, untouched by blood or dirt. "Hello?" His voice cracked against the vast emptiness. "Is anyone here?" The echoes returned to him, but they did not fade. They lingered, overlapping, until his single word multiplied into thousands. His own voice whispered back from every direction, hissing "hello, hello, hello," until the sound was unbearable. He clutched his ears, screaming, "Stop! Stop it!" The echoes ceased. But now, he was not alone. The mirrors lining the ballroom walls were no longer decorative. Each one was alive, filled with versions of himself. Some grinned, some sobbed, some clawed at the glass with bloody fingers. All of them watched him. He staggered backward, horrified, and realized something worse. His own reflection was gone. The mirrors showed everyone but him. Where am I? He whispered. And then he understood. The ballroom itself began to shift, the walls pulsing like lungs, the chandeliers dripping with black ichor. The mirrors darkened one by one until only a single pane remained. In it, he saw not the man he knew, but a hollow-eyed version, skin pale as ash, lips cracked and dry. The reflection raised its hand slowly, deliberately, while he stood frozen, unable to move. And when its palm pressed against the glass, he felt it on his own skin, cold, wet, final. The reflection smiled with teeth too sharp to be human. You're home. The mirror shattered. Piercing scream filled the ballroom, his own scream as shards of glass shot outward, embedding into the walls, the ceiling, the floor. The world fractured, every piece of reality splintering like broken glass. He felt himself pulled apart, each fragment of his body stretched, shredded, scattered into the mirrors around him. When the screaming stopped, there was no Donald Trump in the ballroom, only silence. And then, in the nearest mirror, the faint outline of a man appeared, pale, hollow-eyed, hands pressed against the glass, pounding, begging, but no sound escaped. He was inside, forever. Days later, the staff arrived. At first, they thought nothing unusual had happened. The mansion looked as it always did, though strangely quiet. But soon, they began to notice things. Mirrors fogging over with handprints, faint whispers when they walked down the hallways, a flash of blonde hair in a reflection, gone when they turned their heads. One maid swore she heard his voice in the ballroom muttering, shouting, begging for release. Another claimed she saw his face staring at her from the bathroom mirror, his mouth wide in a silent scream. Within weeks, the entire staff abandoned the estate. No one dared to return. The golden gates of Mar-a-Lago rusted shut, and vines crept slowly over the walls, as if the land itself wanted to smother it. But the mirrors remained, waiting, watching, and deep within their endless reflections, the hollow-eyed figure still pounded against the glass, screaming silently, forever unseen, forever unheard. The house had claimed him, and Mar-a-Lago smiled.